Hi, you're watching BloombergQuint, and we're discussing the contentious issue of GST compensation cess, which has now created considerable polarization between the center and the states. As you know, in a 5-hour-long GST Council meeting last week, the center put two options forward to the states to make up for the shortfall in GST collections that will accrue this year on account of the COVID-19 pandemic and an anyway slowing economy. The fine print of those two options was made available on Saturday. And very briefly, if I can tell you this, the center has calculated that on account of just the implementation of GST, not including the impact of the pandemic or anything else, the shortfall will be 97,000 crore rupees. This they have offered to states to be able to borrow from a special borrowing window of the RBI without having to service that debt, and many other incentives as well. The overall shortfall, though, in compensation cess is 2.35 lakh crores. And that the center has said, if states choose to borrow up to the full amount, this is what the center has computed as on account of the implementation of GST as well as COVID-19, et cetera, if states choose option 2, then they're pretty much on their own, which means they have to go to the market to borrow and they have to service the debt on their own. And there are several other conditions as well. Now, as you know, many states have been voicing their opposition to both these options and saying that they effectively feel cornered. This morning, Thomas Issac, the finance minister of Kerala, said, and I'm quoting from his tweet, "Now that we fully understand the center's intentions on GST compensation, we have no choice other than to reject them lock, stock, and barrel. No state with Atmanirbhar can accept them. Enough is enough. No more surrender of states' rights. GST compensation is our constitutional right." Well, we have with us Dr. Issac today on BloombergQuint to talk us through how states are viewing both of these options and effectively why they feel cornered. Good afternoon, sir. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Dr. Issac, you've made your position very clear that you will not accept any one of these two options. Before I get to what the eventuality of that will be, let me try and understand how you view these two options. For instance, why not accept option 1, given that the center is suggesting that they will make available a special borrowing window from the RBI. They will even subsidize the yields to the extent that they are higher than the GSEC yields, and that the states will not have to service this debt. Effectively, the interest and the full principal payment will be recovered by extending the period of the compensation cess beyond 2022.
Simple reason. I have already presented a budget where I have factored in this 2.3 lakh crore rupees with every state government. Now suddenly, central government comes up with a distinction, drawing a distinction between acts of God and what normally would have been the shortfall. Constitution does not make such distinction. In fact, it's an afterthought. You look at Attorney General's advice. Of course, he makes it clear center has no commitment to provide this money from the Consolidated Fund of India. But he accepts the state's right to have the compensation and that it is up to the GST Council to decide the manner in which is to be drawn. He doesn't even think about this distinction. Now, implication of this is, in India, this is such a vast country, at any month, there would be some state with a drought or a flood or some act of man or God which is creating trouble for them. Are you going to say, no, that state, that is normal situation, therefore the compensation will be cut? That's point number 1. 2, it's impractical. That is to say, you agree to raise everybody's borrowing limit by 0.5%. Now, requirement of the states for increase in the fiscal ceiling could be so different. You have northeastern states which were on surplus before the COVID. They needed no compensation whatsoever. Then there are states like Telangana and so on, which only marginally in compensation. There were states like Kerala and some other states, Maharashtra and so on, which are heavily in the compensation limit. Now, how do you provide everybody 0.5%? Or are you going to now have individual ceiling for each state? I don't know why this thinking, this nitpicking going on. Have some grace, some statesmanship. These states are not outside the union. We constitute a part of the union. And here was a solemn promise given to the states that will be compensated. And now you bring in a distinction like this. Now look here, look from a macroeconomic perspective. The central government provides not 2.3 lakh crores, but only less than 1 lakh crores. What would happen? To 1.3 lakh crores, state's expenditure would be cut. Now, what is the macroeconomic situation? There's aggregate demand has fallen, and therefore there is a recession taking place. Central government is trying to increase that demand, stimulus package and so on, which we are highly critical, saying that you don't transfer income to the people and therefore there's no stimulus to the demand. But nevertheless, they're doing something. Then they are enforcing a cut on the budget of the states. What kind of macroeconomics is this? It's crazy, fellows. Yeah, this is what I call lack of total statesmanship, brinkmanship. You want to corner the states, you want to needle them, and you think you are having cooperative federalism. Now, this facade has to stop. I want to tell, no, we are not going to back down. Let's see. If it is not settled here, we'll go to the court. Let the states of India go and file a case against us in the Supreme Court against the central government, a dispute which cannot be settled in the GST Council. So it's in fact a bad day for India, Indian federalism. Things have come to such a state. You know, we are all of different states, very different ideological persuasions. My party, for example, is against the GST itself on principle, very principled position it has taken. But we also went along with the broad consensus that was emerging. We're willing to say, compromise on many things, actively participated in this process. Not just me, many other states for very different things. Unlike BJP, I want to make it very clear. In Empowered Committee, when Ashin Dasgupta was the chairperson, we had almost reached a kind of understanding of a GST structure which would be flexible. States would be able to choose a rate between a narrow band for SGST and also 60% for the states, a better split for the state. And on the rights of the states, that's what BJP said, they blocked it. Now, in meeting after meeting, they would come and argue against for the states and block the entire process. Now, same guys now are in power. And then you call a GST meeting, 5 hours, you discuss. Only 2 states, Assam and Goa, say something different. Otherwise, everyone, the consensus is no, full compensation has to be paid. And various ways it can be done. This was the sense of the House. Anybody after such a discussion, okay, you understand what the House says. And taken the spirit forward, instead of that, all of a sudden, this bring a surprise, a new principle, 2 propositions, which hardly, even as the finance minister was saying that she has to consult the revenue secretary because and nobody could make sense out of that, etc. So I drew some conclusions. Somebody else drew conclusions. Finally, it was said we'll discuss with the officers. Now, is it the way to run a council? A federal corporatism is there is no conversation going. People come with some predetermined notions. Then I would have appreciated they're presenting their proposition in the beginning. So at there is 5 hours, I can decipher understand what is happening and respond to that. But you're taken for a ride. for 5-hour discussion, having already decided what propositions that they're going to put, which have nothing to do with the spirit of discussion. This is not the way GST Council functions. Therefore, I think we have come to a stage where we can better say, no, no further, no further. This has to stop.
Dr. Issac, I will come to the implications of states refusing both these options. But before that, since the center is not a part of this discussion, let me try and put forward some of the arguments they put forward in the note that they finally did issue on Saturday that laid out the fine print of both of these options. So while they have acknowledged that it is their constitutional commitment to recompense states for the revenue lost, they claim, or they've interpreted the constitutional amendment to mean revenue lost only on account of GST implementation, and they've computed that of the overall 3 lakh crore shortfall that will happen this year on account of GST revenues being low, they've computed that to be about 97,000 crores. So just for our viewers to recount, the center said they expect that the compensation owed to states will be about 3 lakh crores this year, or based on the 14% formula. Of that, they hope to be able to collect 65,000 crores from the levy of compensation cess. The 2.35 lakh crore shortfall, of that they have said only 97,000 crores is on account of GST implementation. That's one argument they've made. The second argument, sir, they've made is that any money that has to go to the states can only go from the Consolidated Fund of India, can only go from the GST Compensation Cess Fund and not from the Consolidated Fund of India. So there's no other way for the center to be able to compensate states except for whatever money is collected in the GST Compensation Fund. And the third issue they've raised is if the center were to borrow and compensate the states, then this might have a fairly dramatic impact on yields and impact the money markets very negatively. And therefore, they've recommended that the states do the borrowing instead. How do you respond to these arguments?
So the last argument, what will happen if center borrows? Center's fiscal deficit goes up. Now, what will happen if state borrow? Then state's fiscal deficit goes up. What will happen to the combined fiscal deficit of center and state? It's neutral to that. So why are they making this point? If they're so worried now, interest rates are lowest in any recent time, and therefore don't worry about interest rates rising. If the interest rate is going to rise, then okay, you monetize your debt. Hey, Rangarajan brought this principle that you can't monetize the revenue as the governor of the Reserve Bank. Even he is saying now in this condition, you have to monetize the debt. So if you're so afraid of these calamitous things that would happen to India, well, they had no qualm, not even a batting of the eyelid, to give 1.75 lakh crores corporate tax reduction. But now they're all worried about the implications. Very well then, monetize the debt. That's for the second. What is the second issue?
So their interpretation of the constitutional amendment line, where they have to only compensate states to the extent of the GST implementation shortfall.
I simply reject that. Constitution does not make this distinction. There is something they want to impose, and makes a foolery of everything that has been done. In every state, the GST is also response to issues in that state, perhaps got made, like flood and drought. Now, are you going to calculate the compensation in these cases also, splitting in the middle too? Constitution does not make any such distinction. I totally reject it. Then there is the question that it has to come from not from the consolidated fund, but from the GST cess fund. Fine, but suppose there is a balance in the cess fund. Where is that balance going to? It is in the consolidated fund of India. There was a surplus in 2 years, first 2 years of GST, and the balance surplus was in the Consolidated Fund of India. In fact, undistributed IGST is entirely in the Consolidated Fund of India. And our argument has been that this is being used to bolster the public account of Government of India. We have criticized that earlier. So when there is a surplus, either in IGST or in the cess, it goes into the Consolidated Fund of India. Now, if there is a deficit, then Indian government wants to wash up the hand.
Dr. Issac, their argument is that the first 2 years of surplus and compensation cess was used to make up for the shortfall in FY20. There was a considerable shortfall in the cess collection versus the money owed to the states. And therefore, that money was exhausted to make up for the shortfall in FY20. So from what I understand, there isn't any substantial amount of surplus left for the center to be able to use that for FY21. That's one issue. And of course, it is not my intent here to make all of the arguments that the center has made in its briefing note, which they've put out very publicly. But I'm just trying to understand, given the fact that this is an extraordinary situation, as everybody would agree, and nobody had anticipated COVID-19, the argument that the center broadly is making is that in a year of this nature, we are not able to meet the 14%, compensation promise. That seems to be the broad argument that they're making. And many people seem to believe that the burden, therefore, should be shared.
See, shared between whom?
Centers.
No, nobody bears any burden here. That's not the way the economy functions. There is a deficit. You borrow, and that borrowed debt is liquidated in a year or 2 or 3. Where is the deficit? Where is the burden gone? Okay, interest burden. Okay, collect the interest also from the cess. So whose burden is there? Thing is that elementary macroeconomics will tell, don't cut the expenditure. Now, if you want the states to spend more, that's all right. But what kind of macroeconomics is that? That in a recession time, you're forcing state governments to reduce the expenditure. There is no economic rationale in what is being said. Tell me, what is the economic rationale? This burden doesn't make any sense. There's no burden to anybody here to borrow. There's interest burden, this principal interest. We pay it in 2, 3, 4 years' time from the cess. Then whose burden is that?
There is a difference in policy approach quite clearly from the way you're seeing it and from the way the center is seeing it. Tell me, sir, if in option 2, which is the 2.35 lakh crore option, if they had said that we will make available a special RBI window, we will try and ensure yields as close to GSEC yields, we will ensure that the states don't have to pay the interest themselves, and this will be first recovered from compensation cess collected, etc., etc. Would that have been something that states would have been more amenable to?
Now, first option is out. Second option does not distinguish between acts of God and acts of man. So that much better. That much better. And but here they say you have to bear the burden of interest. Why interest? Tell me. This is what is it? Looking for something to tickle the states. Huh? Otherwise, why should then? Why can't that interest burden be met from the cess fund? This is what I'm saying. There's no grace in doing things. Unfortunate, but that's the situation. Otherwise, will anybody want to needle states on this? Okay, you can borrow full amount, but then we won't allow you to collect the interest from the cess. Oh, what a kind of cooperative federalism they have in mind. Sorry, yeah. Therefore, both propositions are not acceptable to us.
If they had tweaked option 2 and said that the interest can be paid from cess collected, would that be something that would be acceptable to Kerala, sir?
No. Now our position is no. Let them come with a proposal, then we will consider it. But now our thing is that we are going to oppose it. That's our position. Our Chief Minister has announced it. We want to cooperate with the center, yeah. That's our record in the GST Council. But now it has come to a stage here to say, sorry, you don't believe in cooperative federalism. You want confrontation.
Okay, one more question on the options, sir. There is the belief, from those who view this from the outside, that maybe option two is an effort to discourage states from borrowing too much. I know this goes against the grain of your philosophy that in a time like this, cutting state expenditure, anti-demand and anti-growth. But there are those that say that the consolidated deficit otherwise might shoot up considerably, and this would have its own negative impacts on yields, the way rating agencies view India, the way foreign investors view India, and therefore option two is designed to discourage states from borrowing more and try and incentivize states to stick to the 97,000 crore rupee limit because that's where most of the incentives are loaded. You don't buy into that broader economic philosophy or thought?
Absolutely not. I believe here is a country where majority of people don't get health care, primary education, basic needs. How do you cut expenditure in this country? Expenditure is already budgeted. Now you want to cut that expenditure? I think it is extremely bad idea. If you think it's going to affect the interest rate, monetize your debt. That is the answer. Secondly, look at what is happening in the rest of the world. The whole citadels of neoliberalism, starting with USA, UK, all Western countries, OECD countries. Is anybody sitting and calculating the fiscal deficit rate ratio? No, yeah. So this is a different way of thinking. The thinking is that you are going to squeeze the people so that you emerge out of the COVID with a big message. Well, come whatever may, India has the guts to squeeze the people and see neoliberal principles are upheld. Nothing else. It's ideological. Message to be said. The part of a large borrowing ticket, the larger program, a program which even IMF has given up. Yeah, IMF wants to print SDRs and give to everybody. India and Trump wants to challenge it, stop it. Even IMF has given up this orthodox thing in this COVID tragedy. And now you want to cling to that. So we are ideologically, macroeconomic perspective, opposed to this argument.
All right. Dr. Issac, can you explain the next steps to me now then? Is this, will this get voted on in the GST Council? Because states have been given 7 days. What happens thereafter? If the majority of states oppose both options, what happens if some states are happy to take one of the two options and others are not? What happens? Can you talk us through the steps of how this gets resolved, if at all?
I hope central government will rethink its position. Understand the strong reaction it has aroused and come to an understand. We can discuss. But no drawing distinction between COVID and non-COVID factors and saying that you have to make a sacrifice and so on. No. That we won't accept. But other things can be discussed. There has to be a discussion here. You don't trust ultimate. You choice. You want to choose. You choose. No, we are not going to choose between these two. We will think about something else if you. These are unacceptable. See, yeah, I hope you understand. This is not the way you run accounts.
No, I understand the issue of cooperative federalism being at risk here, sir. I want to try and understand, will this consensus, if at all, if the center were to review its stand and take into account the feedback coming in from states like yours, will such a consensus be found at the next GST Council meeting, or will it be through other sideline discussions? And if no consensus is found, if the center does not change its view, then what will states do?
Few minutes from now, some of the finance ministers are meeting. We will discuss it there. I don't want to speculate on. I think we have to all work together. So let us discuss with them.
All right. But academically, sir, can you explain to me what the process would be if, I'm not saying what you will definitely do, but a dispute of this nature between the center and the states, is the resolution of this well provided for within the GST Council and the GST laws itself? Or do you think it might actually have to be litigated outside of that?
One, Kerala will continue to oppose this too. And if necessary, vote on it. And then we'll seek constitutional remedy for what we think is an infringement of the state rights.
Dr. Issac, till you then find a resolution, and I know I'm looking at the worst case scenario, which I shouldn't, but let's assume that this standoff is not resolved. If you do choose to seek a constitutional remedy, as you've pointed out, which to me can only mean that you will move the Supreme Court on an issue of this nature, in that case, till that case is not resolved, no money will be available to states. Will that not further impinge on states' abilities to run their finances?
Well, this is COVID times. There are limits to the agitations you can have. But I don't know. I have to discuss my political leaders also. But I feel angry enough for being taken for a ride by the central government against what were the best political judgments of getting into a deal with the center like GST. I feel so angry with myself that let's see what comes, but no surrender. This is ultimatums.
Dr. Issac, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts very candidly with us today. We're all hopeful that some resolution will be found, without which these cracks are going to be very difficult to paper over. Thank you for your time, and thank you for speaking to BloombergQuint today.
Okay, thank you.